Initially, in West Bengal, in Kerala, for example, there are very strong documentary movements that start in the 1970s, in the early 1970s, and as Jaya Sankara Mantero explained, who have done a much more thorough job than I have done, those are really the roots of the independent documentary in India. The other important thing to recognize, excuse me, by the way, the...
you want some coffee, Tom?
No, thank you, but I'll grab a bottle of water when it comes.
Yeah.
The image on the front slide, does anyone recognize it? It's from Anand Patwardhan's Prisoners of Conscience, film from 1978 that was released the year after the end of the emergency period, 1975 to 1977. And I think it's very important to symbolically date the emergence of the independent committed documentary in India from the post-emergency period. Post-emergency. Okay, thank you. Is that better? How's that? Is that good?
I think he's trying to increase the volume.
Oh, okay. So, Prisoners of Conscience was exactly about that, about many people who had been imprisoned during the emergency without access to civil liberties. And that image is a very haunting image of that. It was a film commenced underground clandestinely during the emergency and then released after the end of the emergency. And he had also made a film clandestinely during the emergency about the JK movement in Bihar called Waves of Revolution. So Anand's work goes back to the 70s, but it's really in the 80s that we really start this chronology. And his film we saw last evening was Bombay, Our City from 1985. But before we start that, I just want to share with you a little bit of the institutional backdrop. For the first, excuse me, for the first 4 decades of Indian independence, the government films division had the monopoly on documentary in India, almost being 100% monopoly, almost, not 100%, but almost. And it's very easy to be very critical of this institution. And I've used all these really negative words to describe the film's division. Monopoly, bureaucracy, inertia, sycophancy, political interference. How could I be even more negative than that? And worse, this institution had a fatal legacy for Indian documentary. The reason so many people, mass audiences in India, even in 2017, hate documentary is because of these terrible films that they were forced to see in school and in theaters when they were young. This is why they hate documentary. Am I right or am I wrong?
I don't hate documentary. I don't think my students do.
You are an exception to every rule.
My students don't either.
My students do.
So this is a very negative legacy. However, as in all cultural institutions, there were pockets of creativity and resistance. There are films, for example, I will have a little bit of coffee, please. Just half an inch, okay?
Tempted?
Thank you so much. Will that melt the coffee? Thank you. The best films had to do with cultural heritage. And as usual in a cultural bureaucracy, it's the safer films that are the best ones, where artists take risks. No one is going to get into trouble making a film about Basoli painting, right? I mean, they could, but they probably won't. And these films tended to be better, or architecture, or um, sculpture. Some of the other good areas for their achievements were in ethnographic work. For example, Manny Cole made a number of ethnographic documentaries documenting, is the word Drupad? Drupad music? Drupad music. They are wonderful. So there were always exceptions, little corners where people could create valuable work. Or even occasional good films on political topics. For example, the film on untouchability, They Call Me Shamar in 1980, is a pretty decent film. I don't know whether, has anyone seen that?
Yeah.
I think you can easily get it from the Films Division. And then there were a few individuals who made some great films, perhaps because they had a good relationship with the commissioner, or I don't know the reasons. They were given free rein. Manny Cole and Sukhdev in the 60s and 70s, and Manny Cole in the later decades. So it's a really contradictory history, a contradictory legacy, and I don't mean to be so negative. Perhaps some of you will disagree with my blanket statements, but in general, this is my impression of the Films Division. They've always been so nice to me, but I'm sorry, I need to speak frankly. Don't tell them, well, this is being podcast. Uh-oh, now I'm in trouble. I thought just to give you a glimpse of an important work that was produced during the Films Division from 1982, a short film by Mira Devan called A Gift of Love. It's on Bowery. And there were almost no women filmmakers in the Films Division up to this point. I don't know whether the record has improved now. Does anyone know?
Women filmmakers?
Yeah.
Yeah, quite a bit.
Yeah, so the record has improved. But back then, she was pretty unique. And we're just going to look at it quickly now. This is sweet, but I'm not complaining.
ओम प्रतीते हृदयं ददामि मम चित्तमं चित्तं ते अस्तु मम वाचमेकमनाथ सत्वा प्रजापति स्वा नियुक्त मह्यम। इस मंत्र में लता जी ने कहती हैं कि हे मेरे वीर स्वामी,
story about how Mira, who was a very, very young woman at the time, got away with it, but she did. And it's quite unusual for the films division at the time. Does anyone have a sense of the formal exceptionality of this film for 1982? Anyone notice anything? There's no voiceover, is there? It's extremely unusual. Films division tended to impose voiceover commentaries in almost all their works, partly because of the formal conservatism in the studio, but also partly because of the necessity of creating 17 language versions for every film. I mean, this film is in Hindi and English. I'm not sure how broadly it's circulated because of the challenges of versioning, language versioning, but it's maybe a question to look into. Okay, so let's, if there are no comments or questions, we'll move on. Let's talk about the two films we saw yesterday evening. I'm sorry it was such a long program, but I thought it was an extremely interesting experiment to show those two films from the same city, from the same year, back to back. Two committed documentary films, but very different. And I thought maybe we could try and define different approaches in terms of all of these issues: production, cinematography, editing, sound, and politics in the time that remains. We had some very interesting discussions yesterday at dinner over the films, and maybe we can continue those discussions now. Okay, the production of the two films. Would anyone dare to define the difference in terms of the production process? Just from what you saw on the screen in the credits, any sense of how the two films were developed differently by Patwardhan and Nair? Well, I'll point the question even more. What about money? What did you learn from looking at the credits of the two films about money? Who paid for these films? Maybe we should grab the mic, if we could, please.
I said I can't recall.
You can't recall, okay? Anyone? Did anyone notice? Well, Mira Nair's film was financed by American arts agency funding. That's very interesting, isn't it? I believe at this time she was already becoming an expatriate, and I think had studied filmmaking in the US and was able to network there with her collaborators and get this funding for the film. Anand doesn't acknowledge any funding in his credits, but there are a lot of thank yous. There are like 100 names in the credit. And one suspects that all of his friends, his family, everyone helped him buy the camera. I believe by this point he had already bought a 16mm camera and had his own editing machine in his apartment in Dadar. It's a kind of artisanal, self-financed production, which is a way of guaranteeing independence, isn't it? So I think those are significant differences. All the more so that when we look at the credits, credits are very revealing. Everyone should always look at credits. When we look at the credits for Mira Nair, it's an international list of collaborators. There are some Indian collaborators. Did you notice that Ranjan Palit, the co-director of Voices from Valiapal was assistant camera person. But the main tasks in the crew were Americans. So what does that mean that the cinematographer, Mitch Epstein, interviewing, for example, these three women in their flat, is not following what they are saying? It's not obligatory, but it helps, doesn't it, to understand what your subjects are saying when you're shooting them? So I think there's like an additional layer of difficulty and complexity with regard to an international production, filming such a sensitive and complex issue in any culture, let alone in India. Okay, cinematography. Some of you are filmmakers. How did the two films differ in the way they were shot? Oh, the other thing about the credits for Anand that's important. There were about 7 social issue groups, activist groups, community groups listed as collaborators, weren't there? I think that's really important. How many community groups were listed in the Mira Nair credits? 0. Remember when in the book you're reading by Jaya Sankar and Montero, they talk about the symbiotic relationship of documentary and social movements. That's not just a glib throwaway line. That is really important. If you're going to make a film, committed film about social issues, surely you should be consulting with citizens who are already engaged in that issue, whether community groups or whoever. The interesting thing about Mira's film that we just looked at is she has interviewed, they're very stiff interviews, but they're pretty good interviews all the same. I think the films division wasn't very good at doing interviews at this point, but her interviews aren't too bad, and she interviews both citizens, stakeholders in these issues, people affected by dowry burning, but also experts. So she did her homework. She identified people who had a background in, like the woman lawyer, had a background and information about the issue. It was very informative. For Anand, obviously, you can tell throughout the film that he has this symbiotic relationship that the book mentions. Okay, cinematography. I can't talk today, so you have to do some more talking. How do the two films' cinematography differ?
I don't know, I think wrong.
I'm still yet to sink in the whole film, both the films, but something that I quickly attracts my attention is in the first film, Bombay, I think, yeah, Bombay Art City. I saw very long shots and meandering shots. Felt like camera was searching for something all throughout the thing, all throughout the picture. But in the second one, I felt the camera knew what it wanted, and camera was more specific of what it wanted to show. I will take 2 examples to support my point of view. The first film where we have an interview on DC's bungalow, there was a cutaway where the camera was lingering around the house, and I really didn't understand what was the point there. And not just that, there were other shots also where we are interviewing somebody, where he was interviewing a person, but there is this lingering happening around of the onlookers. Whereas in a particular sequence that I remember in Meera Nair's film, where the striptease starts to happen, and like we've seen a lot of skin, I was also waiting what the camera is going to show next, but the camera does not actually reveal and goes on to the onlookers. So I found those interesting points in cinematography. I'm sure there are many.
So just to sum up what you said, Anand had a really exploratory sensibility, exploring the environment of the material he was filming, whereas Nair really seemed to have presuppositions about what they wanted. Interesting point. Oh, okay, anyone else? Madhu.
I feel
this so-called meandering happens for a cause. Maybe to show the middle class, moralistic, capitalistic gaze. The place that this commissioner sits is a place which has lush green lawns, and he is not supporting the cause of these slum dwellers. So basically, he is discussing the value of land, and the place where he is seated is it defies that. So I feel that meandering is not mere meandering; it has a reason.
It's defining individual and actions by their social and geographic space, isn't it? And Mira is much less interested in that. We don't really get a sense of, is the cabaret in Bandra? I think so, right? We don't really get a sense of this place. The only time we go outside the cabaret and the women's apartment is when we follow Rosie to Andhra, to the village in Andhra, right? So it's much more a confined social space, which, is a legitimate priority, perhaps, for an artist, but that's certainly a difference in the film. Anand, throughout his 75 minutes, constantly cuts away to street scenes in Mumbai, which shows you the social context. It also often makes ironic comments on the action. So towards the end, when we have the big signs, keep Bombay green, was it green clean in English, above the scenes of poverty and people living on the footpaths. That's a very ironic cutaway, isn't it? So he's making very cynical commentaries through the use of social space. Anyone else about the cinematography? One thing that I would like to maybe finalize once I've seen the two films again is I feel that the camera for India Cabaret is a little bit more intrusive, a little bit closer to the individual subjects. Maybe a kind of forced intimacy with individual subjects, whereas mostly Anand keeps a more respectful distance from his subjects. I wouldn't say this is 100% true. For example, when we are sort of spying on the mother who has just lost her child and who is wailing and crying in the hut, it's a little bit intrusive, isn't it? But by and large, he keeps a respectful distance from them. Anyone else on the cinematography?
I remember another shot. I felt that Anand's film was more of a direct cinema where, the direct cinema verite style where he was going and exploring. But Meera Nair's film, especially the shot where she was dancing with the glass on her head, and that frame I remember because the camera took a 360-degree without any glitch. Whereas in Anand's film, there were a few shaky shots and there were some composition errors also. So that also I noticed that was different.
So India Cabaret is a little bit slicker.
Yes, perfect. The camera did not make any mistake with the 360 degree.
Yeah, that's interesting. The other point I made in my piece in 1990 that is correctly criticized in the Jaya Sankar book as being a little bit outdated. I made a point about Anand being very interested in groups and group speech, collective monologues or collective commentary on the action. He loves a huddle of people in front of the camera, all talk, and the voice goes from one person to the next to the other. You remember the wonderful scene where the granny speaks very, very quickly in Tamil, and her daughter-in-law, I think, or her daughter-in-law, I think, translates into Hindi for the camera. This is like group speech. I think that sometimes Meera Nair approaches this, for example, when the little group of women who share the flat are all together in the frame and speaking to the camera. But by and large, he's much more interested in individuals. It's much more a individualizing cinematography. And I think the epitome of this is this sequence, this really problematical sequence, where the crew follow Rosie on the train into her village and set up this very awkward sequence where the action unfolding is extremely traumatizing both for Rosie and her family. I think there are problems with that sequence, and maybe we can come back to them. But it's very individualizing. Rosie is detached, taken away from her group, and she's framed as a solitary person. I mean, we could even use the phrase victim aesthetics there. I don't think that victim aesthetics is something that Anand can be reproached for, but I think that Meera Nair, in certain moments of the film, seems to be close to that issue. And the climax, the ending to India Cabaret, where one of the women extricates herself from the milieu and leaves the others behind and is replaced by new performers in the cabaret. That's also sort of a symptomatic ending, isn't it? One of them escapes, right? She's the most resilient character, the most powerful character, but it's an individual solution, not a collective solution. Okay, what else have we got up here? Editing. Any ideas about editing? Were there any brilliant edits you liked, or can you identify some aspects of the editing style of either director? Is either the film a linear narrative? The India Cabaret? It is, isn't it? How would you describe the structure of Bombay or City? it climaxes in the demonstration, doesn't it? At the Flora Fountain, isn't it?
Kulaba.
Oh, Kolaba.
Kulaba.
Okay.
Fountain is in Kulaba.
Yeah. So it's more like a thematic exposition, you say? Part of an overall argument. And I've already commented on the ironic cutaways that are there throughout the film, where an image is used to comment on the action rather than telling us. He shows us rather than tells us. For example, these wonderful cutaways when the proud elite citizens of Mumbai are celebrating their anniversary or whatever, suddenly there's a shot of the workers in the windows up above looking down on them, right? Very effective and succinct commentary on the action about how a whole class of people are being excluded from this celebration. Okay, what is the next? Sound, anyone? Was anyone here yesterday evening? Arjun, did you see this film?
Indian Cabaret?
Yeah, you missed Indian Cabaret,
No,
but
I
you've
watched
seen
it
it before.
earlier. I watched it earlier. I have a copy of the film. And the first film, yeah, I watched both of them.
And how about the sound?
Sound. I think
I'm sorry to put you on the spot. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, it's fine. I have an opinion there.
As I said, it's just an opinion. So if we have a certain definition of documentary film, let us suppose that we have a certain sort of definition for documentary film. By that logic, we also should have a certain sort of definition for sort of sound that must be or can be used for documentary narratives. In that way, speaking in that way, I think Patwardhan's film fits the bill better by way of sound than Meera Nair's does. Because there is a certain melodrama. There's a certain melodrama in India Cabaret, that is non-existent in Anand Patwardhan's film. And I think the melodrama was necessary because it was a theme that had an embedded melodrama in it. So yeah, I think that's it. I mean, Anand, if you ask me to state it very simply, I think Patwardhan's film was more silent than Meera Nair's was. That way.
Okay.
I'm rather worried about the, not worried really, I'm rather thinking about the clash of the semiotic clash in both the films. There's a social semiotics at work in both the films. And at the same time, there's a filmic semiotic at work in both the films. So,
you're saying that both films have pre-established coding that, for example, of sex workers that affects our reading of the film?
Not really affects, but rather, portrays the effect. Portrays the effect as a sort of a clash between two different sets of semiotics, I think. There's a social semiotics at work here, which is embedded in the narrative. Let's say, for example, India Cabaret. It's embedded in the narrative. And then there's the film, the semiotic of the films. The semiotic structure of the films. And I think there's a clash there somewhere. It's really very difficult for somebody who's not well trained in film studies to be able to speak about it I'm not, so I cannot really put my finger right on the spot. But I discern that there is this clash happening. And I think in case of Anand Patwardhan's film, since I have followed his work, also I've watched many of his films, Red Earth, for example. I think he does this with intent, and in order to create a certain sort of conflict, which brings forward what one of his primary, obsessions or rather concerns is as a filmmaker, that of portraying class conflict. This I have on personal record because I once interviewed Patwardhan, and this was what he said at the end of the interview. The class, he used this phrase very, what should I say, very vocally, very loudly, stated class conflict, and he reiterated it over and over again. And have you watched this film Red Earth? Sorry, Red Ant. It's about Bastar.
You're
Red Ant, Red Ant.
you're thinking of Kak,
Mm-hmm.
Sanjay Kak.
Sanjay Ka. No, it was Anand Patwardhan, no? Red Ant?
I don't think so.
I don't remember. Wasn't it Anand Patwardhan?
I don't believe so, but I mean, make your point all the same.
Uh-huh. So I think there's this sense of conflict that's coming across where the social semiotic is clashing with the filmic semiotic, and as a result of that, this intent to create a message that passes on to the audience becomes very clear.
Do you think this is what Jaya Sankar and Montero mean when they argue that he sets up the elite spokespeople in a very facile and blunt way?
Yes, he does. For example, in that, I think that is exactly what happened in that frame where there was this set of ladies who were sitting together, talking and complaining about. There was one lady in particular who was complaining about the discontinued use of contraceptives by her maid, and she was pointing directly opposite to her opposite to where they were sitting, and she was complaining about and also there was the similar sort of thing happens when this person, I don't know who he is, was being interviewed by this lady sitting on the ground, and he was saying that they want tape recorders, transistors, TVs, but they don't know want anything stable. They do not look for stability. They're squatters, and yet they want all these trappings of modern life. I think he does. I think that's what the point that you made. I think that's what it is.
Okay, and the elite are also associated with this specific music, this European music, aren't they? The waltz music, which sort of adds to this.
I think that's a director's complaint that the elite. Of course, this is something that anybody who has followed the construction of the Indian class structure post-independence will understand. Bombay, especially, given the fact that it still has its elite class, still has this sort of colonial hangover thing going on, especially with the Parsis, who were once a very important part of Bombay's elite. And if you recall the I think it was the British Embassy. The party was happening at the British Embassy
I didn't notice that, but it's possible.
because there was a British flag flying there.
Okay.
Okay, and mm, there's a complaint there that and it's a very subtle signification. It's a very subtle signification that look, this is what it is,
Okay.
and the people who were on the first floor looking down, it's obviously segregated. So there was a signification of segregation and signification of colonial effect, maybe.
The other important thing to recognize about sound is that both are using the new sync sound equipment, which was a pioneering thing in India at the
Mhm.
time,
Mhm.
compared to the interviews in Mira Devan,
Meters,
which are extremely stiff, set up with a tripod.
mhm.
3 years later, these two directors are really delivering fluid and sensitive and attentive interviews with their subjects. We can grant them both this. Mira with her American crew, and Anand with these skills that he has also learned, no doubt studying abroad. And I think that 16 millimeter technology was more or less uncomfortable in India.
Yes, yes, that's right.
And so these two films really are a kind of breakthrough.
Also, there's one thing that, of course, please pardon me if you find me too literary, but I think there's a very deep tension. If we posit these two films side by side, there's a very deep tension happening between fact and effect, because whereas this is my impression as a first time viewer. Let me suppose that I also watched India Cabaret for the first time yesterday, and Bombay Art City also for the first time yesterday. The language in which all the characters in the film in Bombay are speaking is full of, uh, what should I say, a network of disjuncted emotions. There's complaint, there's also happiness, and there's also a sad resignation. Because obviously these slum dwellers have got nothing else to look up to. Whereas in India Cabaret, and can we also speak about the film we watched today about the dowry? I think that film has a lot of fact in it. There's effect, of course. There's effect in it on a distinct level, but there's a lot of, I mean, the I would like to call it an investigative sort of journey to uncover the facts of these dowry deaths. And for India Cabaret, I think there's more of factual emotion than a factual emotion happening there.
Okay, maybe this is coming back to using the term melodrama to describe.
I wouldn't. I tried to correct what I said earlier about the melodrama thing.
But I think it's true. India Cabaret unfolds,
Uncovers rather.
that really uncovers facts, but also is a narrative that really solicits our strong
Emotions.
Anand also does that,
But he makes us uncomfortable.
he makes us uncomfortable. He interrupts the emotion with his ironic comments and with his, and I think he avoids any kind of victim.
Because you see, the whole of India, and I think it is also the same for I don't know for the rest of the countries in South Asia. The whole of India is being built in this particular structure, in this particular network of workers, the labor class, and the elite. So that makes us uncomfortable. Because we ourselves right now are sitting inside of a room which has been built like that. So this tenses us. It pushes us to face the situation. Whereas India Cabaret is rather luxurious that way. It gives us a luxury. It brings in a sort of a, what should I say? It's a very, I mean, the word karuna is not really compassion. So it makes for a very compassionate viewing, but Bombay, our city, makes for a very, very uncomfortable viewing.
So this is sort of segueing into politics, because this discomfort
Ethics, yes.
and ethics is
Ethics.
a political, ethical
Mhm.
feeling, isn't it?
Also, there's this very one interesting thing, which is, of course, light. I mean, if you look at Butterworth's film, the stark sunlight, and the starkness of the roads, where not only the roads, these dwellings where these so-called squatters are living and sitting and speaking of this stark sunlight, and whatever shadow is being cast on them is transient. It's either the shadow of a tree or the shadow of a tarpaulin sheet. But where where the elite is being represented, where the elites are being represented, are being portrayed, it's always shadowy, nice, cool, calm, and everything. So that's one thing that really struck me there.
So again, social analysis is coming out of space.
Hmm.
Okay, we need to wrap up. Is there a final comment on the politics and ethics of the two? Abhishek, have you got a?
Speaking of the music, I had a quick point to make. I do not know if Arjun will be with me. I think in one of your lectures, Tom, when you were discussing islands, you were saying that some of these directors tend to use these stock recipes which have worked, and they try to imitate or emulate it time and again. So I think Anand, I never followed Anand's earlier works, but so some of the recent films I'm aware of, say for example, Jai Bhim and all of that, if you're aware, that musical trope which like he uses as a refrain, I think that's his stock recipe that keeps coming back. I was not aware of his work in the 80s, but more recent works. I think it struck me, and I tried to correlate with what you mentioned while speaking of.
You mean the use of performed?
Yes, it's that refrain kind of music that came back as a trope again and again. So that's a musical trope that keeps recurring in Anand's recent films. I can say I'm not aware of his work in the 80s.
And this is also a way of collaborating with his subjects, incorporating their performance into the discourse of the film, relying on their musical performances as opposed to imposing his own analysis on them. Dea, you get the last word.
Yeah. See, about Meera Nair's film, she starts off with Bollywood music. I mean, since we're discussing music, so she starts off with Bollywood music, and that kind of indicates how we should view the film. I mean, there will be. I mean, there will be certain melodramatic tropes in the film, as
No, I didn't mean it that way. I didn't mean it. That's why I interrupt. I didn't mean melodrama on that level. I meant melodrama in.
But I
Okay,
very happy
but-
to use the word melodrama. So continue.
Yeah. So as am I, because you see, what I feel is a shortcoming of Meera Nair's film is that it kind of falls into a trap from binary. Who is the binary of a good woman and a bad woman, and it kind of it never shifts away from that. From this binary, and also what happens in the end is that her solution, like, it's not a solution really, but the film concludes with this woman getting married. So again you come back to that discourse of marriage and society and family and things like that. So Meera Nair, even though she's trying to, I mean, let's say, make a quote unquote, to use a very loaded term, feminist film, I think she herself does not escape. The film does not escape that binary of good woman, bad
Meera Nair
woman,
has
married
always
woman,
tried to
unmarried.
make feminist films and hate.
Yeah.
Hate is great.
Yeah.
So
So
I think her understanding of feminism as politics very much based on very distanced, actually.
Maybe this is a very sweeping comment, and maybe I should not be making it. But whenever Meera Nair has tried to make so-called feminist films, she has failed desperately. And she said, I think there was an interview where she said that feminism is not really something that I try to do, but it comes through. So, oh no, it was a live interview in Delhi I once heard, and I think it's because she distances her understanding of her subjects and posits it alongside her understanding of her craft. So there, I think what she said, I agree with that. Not with the melodrama part, but with the binary or the dichotomy, as you might have it, of India Cabaret. Yes, that's true. I
Okay,
think, yeah.
that was the final pronouncement, and now we deserve our.
I have one observation.
Take the mic, please.
I have one observation regarding the audiography of both the films. In both the films, the non-diegetic sounds are less used. Only the diegetic sounds are used in both the films. That is my observation.
With the exception of Anand's European music for the elite satire. Yeah?
Yes, that is why I have used less.
Yes.
I haven't used lack of non-diegetic because very few examples are there in which Anpatavardhan has used the non-diegetic thing. Otherwise, both have used the diegetic sound in a lot way in both the films.
And in this sense, they are both departing from their inherited standard of the films division, aren't they?
Yes.
Eschewing voiceover commentary and non-diegetic music, except with those small exceptions.
Yes, yes.
Okay, I think that's a very good point.
And in case of lighting, what I have found, the lightings, most of the lightings in the second film, Mironia's films, it has used the artificial light, and the other one it has used the sunlight. Yes, what you have also observed that one. It's because of the indoor and outdoor location.
Right. Good point, and I think we can extrapolate from that about ethics and privacy, private space and public space, but we don't have time right now. Someone here wanted to jump in. Rajni wanted to jump in. Thank you.
I would slightly disagree with him when he says that the non-diegetic sounds are pretty less in Anand's film. I would say that non-diegetic sounds are the most important element in Anand's film because he repeatedly is putting questions. As an interviewer, he becomes part of the film. He's absent in most of the frames, but his questions as a form of voice or sound is present. So even that qualifies to be a non-diegetic sound.
Maybe this is just a semantic thing. Myself, I wouldn't say the interviewer's questions is non-diegetic, but it is certainly off screen.
Mm.
So we're in agreement that they're off screen, but in fact, the interviewer is implied as part of the world of the film, isn't he? His presence is felt, especially when that wonderfully articulate woman accuses him of, advancing his career with my pictures. Why are you taking photographs of me? He is addressed specifically, so he is in the film. So in that sense, we have a little semantic thing, difference on about that. But I think we're in agreement. Other than that, okay. We need tea. Thank you very much for your participation in this discussion. chronologically past the 1980s to think about more recent work. And since the field is so huge, I thought we would narrow the focus a little bit and explore a little bit feminist voices in Indian independent documentary of the last 25 years or so. Okay? This is all thanks to YouTube, since I don't have copies of any of these works, and I'm going to do a little bit of a experimental thing. We're going to look at one of the film's full length, 20 minutes. We're going to look at Gulabi Gang, and I understand from asking several of you that probably everyone has seen Gulabi Gang. How many people have seen Gulabi Gang?
Yeah, but there was a film also on it, like Bollywood, a Bollywood.
I know, and there was a third film called Pink Saris by Kim Longbinato, who's a British director. So these women in Bihar, right, or Uttar Pradesh, have become very popular cinematically. But we'll look at it. It's always worth seeing a film a second time. And then we're going to look at 3 trailers only, just to give us an idea of what 3 other filmmakers, 3 other films are doing between the 1990s and the present decade. And then we'll open up again the discussion. I think it worked very well in the last hour to hear you, who are a little bit more qualified to talk about the Indian context than I am, to get your sense of what's going on. Have we lost Arjun and his contingent?
Yes. I think they are having breakfast.
Okay, any questions before we get started? So here's what we're going to look at: Gulabi Gang, followed by the trailer for Rishta, Manjira Datta, 1995. Has anyone seen that? She is a very important filmmaker in my mind, and I just do not understand why she's left out of this book. It's very unfortunate because her work is very important. She's in Delhi. She's been inactive for a few years, but I think her work is worth discovering. Then we'll look at a trailer of a film by another Delhi filmmaker, Sejo Singh, Sonamati. And then we'll look at the first maybe 5 minutes of another film from 2003, On an Express Highway, by another prize-winning feminist director, Reena Mohan. So I think we've got our work laid out for us, and let's move right into it. I want you to watch these 3 trailers and this full-length film to think about not only the focus of the films, the topical focus, the subjects, but also the platforms in which these subjects are being addressed and the angles from which these directors are treating their subjects. Okay? So let's hope that our Wi-Fi continues to function. all those funny titles. What was the function of the titles? Just to identify people?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I was worried once it started that and the original has this narrator walking through the, no. So I did make a mistake,
This is a news feature version.
but by the same director or not?
I think different direction.
I don't think it's the same director. I think this is an investigative report.
Okay, I really apologize for that.
But it covers it's the same concept in it.
Okay, well, I made a mistake. I guess it is not on YouTube after all.
The documentary
Yes.
about them. No, it's not on YouTube.
Okay, well, I apologize for making that mistake.
It's the same.
I think it covers
Yeah,
the important part.
it covers.
But it's not the film. Okay, here's the trailer for Rishta, which is about relationships. It's another topic really related to violence against women, but in this case, female feticide, I guess is what you would say. Sorry?
No, that's the Bengali word for it. Bhrunhatya.
Okay.
मेरे लिए ये सबसे मेरी प्यारी बहन थी, इतना सिद्धार्थ था, अब इसको मतलब कि ग्रेट मिस
was to think about what it means, what my concept of feminist voices means, and how this concept is mediated by object, the subject of the film, by the platform a film is used, and the angle the director chooses. So with these 4 films, some are quite similar to those we looked at from the 80s in terms of, that is Mira Devon's film and Mira Nair's film about violence to women, about the ideology of the family and sexuality in Indian society. The 4th film is on a more unconventionally feminist topic. Is a film feminist because it's a woman director? Is a film feminist because it's about a woman subject, a portrait of a woman? Can a film about spirituality and religion be a feminist film? What are the various genres of committed documentary that are represented by these 4 samples? And can we recognize directions that are being followed in the last couple of decades here with feminist documentary, a very diverse field, obviously. So let's see if we can together come up with any answers to these questions. Does anyone want to jump in? Can a feminist film be broadcast on Doordarshan, for example? We need a mic.
Lok Sabha TV has a slot for documentaries, and within that, they show some of the films that are made by female filmmakers. Qualifies to become a feminist film.
So in previous decades, these films were marginalized and not distributed properly. Finally, there's a platform, a small platform, but a platform in which some of these directors can access a broad audience. So this is a breakthrough. And is there any price to be paid for that? Any compromise or?
Actually, Thomas, I think Doordarshan's agenda, it is only PSBT films. Mostly PSBT films.
Yeah. See, I don't think Doordarshan ever had a problem with feminist films or, women-centric films. I'll not call them feminist. Like, women-centric films.
You use the term women-sanctioned films?
Women-centric.
Women-centric film, good term.
Okay. So, Doordarshan never had a problem with that. Doordarshan had a problem with films that were anti-state. So, because women-centric films, they were part of the development agenda of the government. So, as such, Doordarshan never had a problem with something, broadcasting something like this, because I think...
No, it's okay. Within the public service policy also...
pass my please.
With this public service policy also of broadcasting, so most of the cases when a Doordarshan and what she said about this RSTV, Rajya Sabha TV and LSTV, Lok Sabha TV, they are providing a new platform. But if you see in past manner also, Doordarshan has no any problem with this particular. They had screened various programs related to this issue and mostly on the women empowerment related issues.
Because that was the agenda that was developed for Prasar Bharati, etc. It encompassed these ideas of women empowerment, of bringing forth farmer issues, etc., etc. So they kind of they had this agenda in their in the very Prasar Bharati Act itself. It is encompassed.
So this is a very exciting development then, that these filmmakers can access brought
But
on.
yes, then but the point is that they cannot ask certain questions. Like,
For example,
for example, say you can talk about women empowerment, you can talk about women issues, you can talk about female feticide, etc. But what you can't question is what is the state doing about it. Those questions you cannot ask. You can just kind of broadcast the issue, make a general commentary about the issue, but you cannot ask very questions that will make the state uncomfortable.
There are some serials also by Deepti
will you
Naval.
pass the mic?
There was a serial basically by Deepti Naval.
Grab the mic, it's right there.
There was basically a serial by Deepti Naval, Thoda Sa Asman or something like that. That was also very different and feminist kind of a thing. Women's existence and the traditional work that a woman is supposed to do and how she challenges that. I think 3 women, they are talking among themselves. Have you watched that? I don't.
And so you're saying,
I get your point.
so you're saying,
I have a small question, Tom. Does a text that talk about women become feminist by default?
No,
This was my question.
That is actually my question regarding on an express highway that you told that because this is by a woman and this is woman centric, so it might.
Well, this was my question to you. You
I
can't throw this question back at
no,
me.
no. It was just the beginning of what I wanted to say. I think the last trailer that we saw about Jignya. I think if we try to think of all these, if we look at it from a gender lens, all these clips, look at all of them from gender lens, I think that film was the most feminist of all of them. The last one, the film about Jignya, the Sadhvi, she who became a Sadhvi, because that gives it is the only film which brings forward an agency, which gives the subject an agency of entirely of her own. Gulabi Gang, Rishte, Sonamati, all these other films, feminist films. I would rather call them, because this phrase.
I think you're being very argumentative, Arjun. How can you argue that Gulabi Gang and Sonamati do not show women with agency?
I'm coming to that.
Okay.
Do you want me not to be argumentative?
No, I like you being argumentative. I just don't want you to tell lies.
No, I'm not telling you lying. What I'm telling you is what I feel. Okay. And I don't think I'm lying there. Anyway, so the point is, I think everybody has come across this interview of Rahul Gandhi by Arnab Goswami, where all he could speak about was women empowerment, women empowerment, women empowerment. So that phrase, women empowerment, and the passing on of agency to women is also in a very controlled manner, is again a part of a very distinct and very pronounced and very deeply embedded state-sponsored apparatus, I feel. So because if Gulabi Gang was a film that really gave the women in the subject in the film a lot of agency, and then it would have been banned, like Nandita Das's Firak was. It would have been banned. And because this entire idea of women speaking out against the ills of the society is something that fits in very well with the government's idea of women empowerment, or rather, not the government, the state's idea of women empowerment. And this is just the film. Now let me shift to the context, the cultural context of Gulabi Gang. Just a small comment. Gulabi Gang, as she mentioned, as Sampath Pal mentioned, about the colors. There was a short where she was speaking about the different colors, why she chose pink. Gulabi Gang, unfortunately, right now, has become a very important political tool, electoral political tool, which is what all cooperatives end up being, in India at least. This is what I feel. And
what end up being?
An electoral political tool. The harnessing of votes.
Which is what all acts end up being. I didn't hear your word.
All, not cooperatives. I think that was not the right word to use. Such collectives that end up being like that. And the Gulabi Gang now is heavily sponsored by Mulayam Singh's, blah, 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 whatever that it is. I know this on first-hand basis. And I think that Jigna's the film about Jigna was something that was questioning the idea, because in Jainism, like in Buddhism, like in Hinduism, like in Islam, like in Christianity, women are relegated a very inferior role. Now Jigna is somebody where the people are saying that she's an exception. She has spoken out against the structure of inferiority that all women are relegated to within organized religion. So I feel that is more feminist.
That's an interesting point. Pass the mic to your left.
My left.
No, you're right.
My right.
Over there. You had your hand up, right?
No.
No, you
No,
don't.
he was stretching.
Okay, sorry. Who is next?
I don't have one.
Okay, well, what about?
Also, Tom, I would like to know your perspective about what is a feminist film. Because feminism, there are many feminisms.
Well, there are, and that is also my point.
Yeah.
Some of these films provide us with exemplary heroines and exemplary actions for us to follow. In fact, you could argue that all four of them do. Not the second one. The second one is about a victim, isn't it? But the other three provide exemplary actions, exemplary heroines,
You can
correct?
also include India Cabaret in that, which
Yeah.
we yesterday saw. So
We could actually,
We
in
could.
a way.
In a way.
If not entirely, we could also include that particular film in this list.
Sure.
But as
So
the-
that is an element that many would argue comprises a feminist film. But others might argue that it needs, that a feminist film requires a more focused critique of
The patriarchy.
or analysis of patriarchal society. Is that true? Because Rishta, I think, does that. The whole, you have to take my word for it, in the full-length film, the analysis of the industry of abortion and ultrasound detection. It comes under material scrutiny, and it's a very interesting essay on that. And the marriage industry as well. So is that element also required in a feminist film, or do we accept a spectrum? You were really trying to pin me down on this earlier about talking about the theory and the politics of feminism, and here's our chance. So are we talking about an acceptable axis along which various kinds of feminisms exist, or do we have very particular demands on this? Anyone want to jump in?
When you said
we've had enough male voices in this.
Oh,
We're opening.
that's discrimination.
Neha.
Madam has.
Vandana.
Yeah. That's my quick, not working. Like, I'm doing a back roller. It's okay. I think I'm audible. No, actually, initially when Arjun pointed out when he started, I was a little uncomfortable. But Gulabi gang, one thing I noticed, most of the women were still in parda. So that was something that struck me, and it's I don't know, it was an attempt at a collective voice. And a collective voice, some kind of an empowerment, but individually, I really don't know about Gulabi much about Gulabi gang. But what made me very uncomfortable was
still seeing the women in parda. Many shots were there where, yeah.
She was saying that she wasn't fighting for women, but for the rights of the poor.
Yeah, the rights of the poor. So I really didn't see much of a feminist perspective or an empowerment or as such in what I just saw. I wish I'd seen more or I knew more about Gulabi Gang, but I wasn't very convinced that it's a feminist or an agency for empowerment of women.
So we have a film in which gender intersects with class in the analysis, but we also want individual affirmation in terms of dress codes and self-presentation. Is that it?
If I may just add to Gulabi Gang, of course it conforms to lots of cultural nuances and practices that we have. But one thing that also sets it apart is the subversion, because that's not how we perceive Indian women to be taking a stick and fighting. So the subversive elements is what also I feel qualifies it to be a feminist film.
Interesting point. Madhu.
There is also this misconception that anything that is made by a woman gets into the category of women-centric, whether it's literature or anything. So can I apply the same question to these films?
It's a very good point. I mean, I was going to ask this question also. A lot of Manjira's work does not pertain to women-centric subjects. For example, she made a great film on the Green Revolution and was very prophetic about the increasing devastation the Green Revolution, fertilizer revolution has had on Indian rural agriculture. Does that constitute a feminist film? Do we need to broaden our concept of feminism? I would say it does, even though gender is not really the focus of the film. Yeah, or do we just leave this as an unanswered question and embrace a committed documentary in which women do not have to make women-centric films? I would say yes, we do. Is that the point you're making? It's very complicated.
I think we are getting into difficult territory now.
Let me just come back to platforms for 1 minute, and then we'll come back to you, Arjun. Okay. One of the critiques in A Fly in the Curry is about NGOs and how NGOs are financing Indian social issue documentaries. And one of the filmmakers says that this has led to the nadir of Indian committed documentary. The fact that foreign benevolent associations have invested all this money in films like Gulabi Gang and produce a kind of international political framework in which these films circulate. Is this a legitimate issue, or do filmmakers have the right to take whatever money is given to them so they can earn their living and make their work? Any thoughts on that?
I think it's about the spectacle, the spectacle that the world wants to see. But somewhere, I think in the unconscious, there's this thing working that India is still a land of wonders. All like Gulabi Gang itself, and it's not an exception. It's not something that, of course, now it has become an exception because it has received a lot of acclaim, and a lot of money has been donated, and therefore it has become a huge collective of nearly, as they say, 250,000 women. But such collectives are not rare. Even in Silchar, even in Bharat Valley, I know of such collectives that exist in the peripheries of the which border between the rural and the peri-urban, very near Silchar. If you go, let's say, 10 kilometers down this road towards the university at Meethapani, there's a similar collective of elderly women, who take such cases up and deal with them very harshly. Usually it's violence that they mete out to the perpetrators of the crime that has happened. This isn't very rare. Of course, the scale of Gulabi Gang is much, much larger. About foreign benevolent organizations investing in cultural or artistic production in India, I'm very iffy about that sort of. The Ford Foundation, for example, and several other foreign benevolent organizations or agencies that I've come across. There's a restriction that there's this unsaid restriction that you will do this and you will not do anything else. Only if you do this, then you'll get paid. If not, you'll not get paid. So I think filmmakers do have a right to earn their own living. How else are they going to live? They have to eat, and they have to continue doing their work. So the state has stopped funding. Yes, the state has stopped funding, has blocked a lot of funding that used to go into information-oriented artistic production. And where do these independent filmmakers find filmmakers who are not associated with any production houses? Where do they find their bread and butter?
The only other alternative is the Anand Patwardhan alternative, which is refusing any money, strings attached, and a self-financed independent operation.
That's committed filmmaking.
That's committed filmmaking, and it's not a model that everyone can emulate.
Well, I don't think it's not a model that everybody can emulate. It's not like that. I think it's a model everybody can emulate on some level or the other, because yeah, is there anything? No. So I think it's a model everybody can emulate. For example,
I don't think so.
I'll tell you how. I run a literary festival myself. I do not take any money with any sort of strings attached. No. It's just an example. Several people doing this sort of thing. Not everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, at least this choice. Most people don't want to take the choice. Like Anand Patwardhan does, or Sanjay Kak does, they don't want to take it up.
Okay. I mean, Anand does not hide the fact that he comes from an elite family and has family resources that enable him to get the start. He lives in a rent-controlled flat in Dadar, and he has a lot of privilege, and he does not hide this caste privilege and class privilege. And so I don't think everyone can emulate that. So, I mean, it's a very complicated landscape, and we won't be able to solve it today. And I noticed it's 1:15, so it is lunchtime.
Yes.
Did anyone have a final word? We haven't answered any questions, but we've
I think
Certainly
it is very
poked up.
difficult to answer the questions that we are asking right now.
We've problematized it, and that's
Okay.
the purpose of this.
Just a word about today's screenings. We're shifting now into sexuality. We've wrapped up committed documentary with all of these unanswered questions. We're shifting now into sexual representation. So we're starting the screenings today. Short films about the so-called sexual revolution in the West, in North America specifically, in the 1960s and 70s. So this is at 4 o'clock. These films are quite frank. And I don't believe in trigger warnings, but I just wanted you to be aware that these films are quite frank and to come with open eyes or closed eyes. Okay, we'll see you at 4 o'clock.